New voice on the podcast today for folks that listen on a regular basis. Want to welcome Ryan Jones to the show. Ryan, what is up?
What's up, Scott?
It's exciting to have you in here. You've been a coach with us now for several years. Huge part of the team, huge part of what happens here on a daily basis. And I'm excited to kind of get into today's conversation with you because of your experiences that you've had both personally through your own journey, but also with clients. I think it can add a lot of perspective and objectivity to the topic of what we're going to get into today. But anyway, man, you excited to be here? Are you nervous? What's up?
A little nervous, but it's fun chatting with you guys, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's usually all we're trying to do is just have a conversation. So we'll just jump right in and start having that conversation. And if you start to sound nervous, I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you to get your shit together, and let's get back on it. But I don't anticipate that at all. Today, the topic that I wanted to talk about, and we've discussed a little bit prior to the show, but I didn't want to get too deep into it because we can easily get off on a tangent where we should have had the mics on, I think, to kind of talk about things, to maybe discuss, debate maybe a little bit, share some experiences to help listeners and viewers get a little bit better handle on contrast training, the topic of contrast training for strength, and for power, and more from an athletic development perspective. Mm-hmm. Particularly for those folks out there that are pursuing, that level of training or a higher level of training, but also maybe prep the newer and more novice exerciser for, the next part of their journey or something to kind of shoot for and start to tie it in. Sometimes it's tough for us to kind of, at least I find it's tough for us to maybe entertain or infotain the higher achiever.
Yeah.
Or that athlete that's been doing things for a long time or has done a lot of things, had a lot of success. As I think what they're looking for, kind of the niche-y little things that we may be able to provide. And sometimes we stay a little broader. So I'm hoping this one maybe helps them a little bit more today. And it isn't too far over the head or feel too far out of reach for the person's like, look, man, I'm sort of new in my journey, or I'm not at this level yet. And I want to preface this by saying, just because you may be more of a novice to intermediate exerciser, and some of this may or may not be appropriate for you at this particular point, I think it'd be very helpful for you to understand where your training could get to and why the things from foundationally that you may be doing now lead up to this and prepare you for this kind of stuff. Think of it more as like you're in a preparatory phase for this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But anyway, contrast training. Let's talk about it. Just kind of at a high level, like what can we say about it to kind of sum it up? What's the easiest way to do it? Who wants to start? Cece?
When I think of contrast training, I think of strength training combined with some type of power or explosive exercise right afterwards that resembles the movement pattern of the strength training exercise that was just completed.
So an example would be like a squat, a heavy loaded barbell back squat. Everybody can relate to that, right? Yeah. Followed immediately by like a broad jump or a box jump, some type of a plyometric movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So heavy strength, and we'll define what that means, followed by plyometric or power, more specifically power activity, where we're starting to, and this would be less loaded, and you could even maybe consider it in some cases like unloaded if we're using body weight, but there's still loads and forces being placed on the body. But we'll immediately do this exercise right after that heavy loaded back squat. So do my heavy loaded back squat within seconds. We'll say less than 30 in most cases, and we'll get into that as well. We are right into a short series of explosive power movements. Again, going back to like the box jump or broad jump. Mm-hmm. Let's talk briefly around kind of what's happening maybe physiologically and the benefits that you can get from this, from a training, at least from a training effect, when you start adding contrast training into your program. What are the basic things we want to tell people without getting too sciencey and boring the hell out of them?
What are the base things such as motor recruitment? So depending on the load that you're using for your strength exercise, you're getting a near maximal motor recruitment from the exercise that you're going through, and then you're going into a more neurologically explosive type of movement pattern afterwards. So you're going to get a lot of central nervous system. I don't want to say excitement. What's another word that I'm looking for? Recruitment. And it can be quite taxing. So your rest periods are going to be longer.
Yeah, before we start getting down into that, yeah. So what are we looking at here? We're basically looking at like, if I get under, let's use that barbell back squat to broad jump example.
Yeah.
What's happening here? So when we get under that bar, and by the way, so we're going to be looking at very heavy loads, somewhere like between 1 and 5 repetitions of, let's say, somewhere between 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max, as an example. It doesn't have to be that, but it does need to be taxing.
Yeah.
If we're looking at perceived rate of exertion, or those kind of things, or rate of perceived exertion, sorry. If you're kind of using that as a scale, we're talking at a level 10, 9 to 10 here, right? In a very, very short period of time. What's happening there? Nervous system recruitment. So you mentioned like central nervous system, and you said you didn't want to use the word excitement. I don't like that word either, but I think it's easy for people to latch onto. It's like, what is happening? Well, everything's firing on.
Switched on.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it feel like to be like a level 10 on a barbell back squat?
Yeah, everything's firing, everything's going. You're excited from it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So. I mean, you're struggling, right? You're having to focus at a very high level. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, respiratory rate goes up, sweating, happens. Your body temperature goes up because of all the things that are firing on, all the bells and whistles are going on, right? So that happens. Now, that effect continues beyond after I've re-racked the bar. So that nervous system is still fired up. It isn't like I unload the bar and everything just goes, down regulates right back to normal. We have what's called, and this is an important concept for people to understand without having to have a deep level of understanding of physiology, is what's called post-activation potentiation. This is a big mouthful. Post-activation potentiation. PAP for short. So what that means is like, while I've got this excited neuromuscular system and central nervous system working for me, when that happens, what I'm doing is I've recruited, in order for me to do that very heavy back squat, I've had to recruit more motor neurons and motor units. Now, again, without getting too deep into this, the muscles in your body have motor units, or motor neurons and motor units. The neurons tell the units what to do. So you have this kind of group. You got a neuron, and it sends out signals to units, which are attached to cells. And so this messaging is going back and forth. And the higher level of excitement means the higher level of recruitment is necessary. So if I get under 135, I might not have as many motor units, or motor neurons, therefore as many motor units firing to move the 135 as it would take me to move the 315 on the bar.
Yeah. Well, I think like the point is that your body's only going to recruit what it needs to for the load. So whatever load is challenging or output, it's not just like it's going to recruit the number of motor units, but also the size. There's different size of motor units. So it's going to recruit those larger motor units because it needs that to be able to move the heavier load. Let's say it's 315, whatever it is for you. Right. And then you continue that high output, that high recruitment number and size, and you apply that to the lighter load implement, and you have that high aggressive intent with the lighter implement.
Great explanation. So basically all the shit's switched on from this previous heavy loaded movement. And now when I move into the explosive movement, which is lighter, and had I done that without the PAP, I might not be, and I probably wouldn't be recruiting as many as many motor neurons and units, and the size and number and volume of those things as I am now after the heavy movement.
Yes.
So I hope that makes sense. And I think you did a really great job. I may have just convoluted the shit out of that. So I apologize.
Stealing my shit.
But I'm not a physiology teacher. But the concept is what you explained there. That was a good job. So I think people are like, oh, okay, I get it. So now what I have is I have more things that are going to be responsive for me in this explosive power movement that I made because under a lighter load.
Yeah.
And again, we said this before, maybe even unloaded in the case of like a box jump or a sprint or something like that, or a broad jump. So if I can do that, right, then my body learns, right? We already know this is progressive overload. Like I can get a higher output, which means I could get a better training effect,
yes.
which means scientifically, as we start to look at this and study this stuff, that you can get up to 20% or more, build 20% more strength in a very short period of time using these things. Now, I throw that percentage out when you're looking at this. This is very dependent on what you're doing, who the athlete is, and whatever else, but it's generally agreed upon that this type of training can very dramatically increase strength, power, speed, and reaction time. So for the athlete, all those things for me are music to my ears. I don't care what I do, what athletic, event or thing that I'm trying to pursue. All that stuff sounds very cool, very interesting, and quite frankly, very sexy.
Yeah,
I'm like, everybody should be contrast training, right?
Yeah.
So that's I think that's basically the basic overview or premise that we can kind of move from. Anything else you want to say, Ryan?
Well, I just think that I think the benefit from this, why this training can be a game changer for someone who hasn't implemented it, is a lot of the initial gains you see in strength or output are neurological. So, it's not necessarily you're going to pack on muscle right out the gate, but when we're having high outputs, whether it's, explosiveness, power, even speed moving quickly, getting a higher recruitment of your nervous system can increase that 20%. Even else, you could have not even put on a pound of muscle, but just being able to tap into that system more effectively. So that's where it can be really game changer for someone who hasn't done this.
Yeah, and anybody that's at this level of training or at this point in their training where they might think about implementing this in an appropriate manner.
Yeah.
All they have to do is remember back to that very first couple of weeks they ever spent in the gym, and everybody's been there, right? It's the exact same concept in that, like that set of 10-pound dumbbells that you started with maybe on your bench press or on your arm curls, whatever the hell it was that you started with on week 1 and 2 that felt like 100 pounds.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, they started to feel like 20 pounders. And then very quickly, they're like, these 10 pounders are they're not challenging for me at all. What happened there? Did you put on massive amounts of muscle and muscular strength? No. What you did was you just trained your nervous system to be more efficient at recruiting the things you needed to do in order to move that load. It's the exact same. It's very, very. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think you're making a good point there. So to come over the top, if you can remember that as the novice person, like remember how heavy those, I don't know, maybe 10 pounders isn't an example, but the first time you were bench pressing and you used the bar and it felt like 1,000,000 pounds and it was all over the place. It was shaky. It was, you were jiggling and wriggling on the way down and getting, and then within a matter of weeks, you're loading plates on the bar. In some cases, that's what we're talking about here, without adding a ton of muscular volume, right? So, really great point. All right. So then moving in, that's we sort of mentioned the benefits there if we're moving through here. Like if I'm an athlete, I'm trying to do things. Here's some other benefits that I see to this. Like for me, we're sort of in the winter months. We're definitely in the winter months. We're about to enter into December when we're recording this. A lot of people's workouts end up having to move more inside because of weather and temperatures, rain, snow, that kind of stuff. And they find themselves maybe the serious athlete maybe spending a little bit more time in the weight room if you're not a winter sport athlete. This is the time where you're building that strength, you're building that power in your periodization of your training. And so that can get a little mundane. And I find that at the same time, this is a really good opportunity to maybe change things up to really push the strength and power output within your program. Again, as long as it's not detrimental to your long-term plans and goals, right? So this is a great way to kind of give your body a little bit of a different stimulus to change it up a little bit. Whether you're trying to build, whether speed is important to you or not, the application of speed within this application of training, that being contrast training, will help you with your strength. So let's not pigeonhole it into, this is just for the sprinter or the jumper or the whatever.
Well, and I mean, there's even been some good studies, not necessarily contrast training specifically, but even for the aging population, having a high post-activation or high recruitment, being able to recruit your nervous system. I mean, there's even data of that reducing falls and things like that outside of just the athlete. So it's really good for anyone if applied correctly.
Yeah, and that's the key is the application. So yeah, I mean, it really is, it could be applied a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of times we do sort of pigeonhole or silo it, and this is athletic training. We're talking about increased, power or strength and power for the athlete. But, depending on what your philosophy is, in terms of being a coach or a trainer or even an exerciser, being, one that loves to or one that doesn't, like people could say like everybody's an athlete inside or was at one point or could be. What is your potential?
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that because I've seen a lot of people that just, dude, you're not an athlete, right? And no matter how hard we try, we're not going to be able to call you that in my mind. But at the same time, like we're all humans. Yeah. We all are built very, very similarly. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, a lot of people could benefit by this. So again, increasing in strength facilitates muscle growth. Again, if you have a 25 to say 75% more potential of activation, think about what that's going to do in your strength program. I want that. Yeah. Like people are often, you can look for these things in like some of like the EMG studies and things that they've done specific to like the complex trainers, where they're using electrical stimulus, things like that. There's all kinds of, people are always reaching for this different science or gadgets to maybe even, get the edge in this way. This is very simple premise and programming variables that you can add to get major increases along the way.
Without like the technology component.
Without the tech, without the tech. Anybody can do this. It's not exclusive, right? And at the same time, it's very accessible. The other thing I really love about it is it's very time efficient, right? I mean, you don't, and alongside that, like no matter where you are in your program, this isn't or doesn't have to take away from your typical strength training, bodybuilding type routine. Again, if you're a competitive bodybuilder, right? I'm not saying you can't gain benefit by this, but I'll also say this may not be the best use of your time.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, if you're like, I bodybuild as, recreation, or that's the bigger part of my lifting program within my fitness program, you could gain a lot of benefit here. And it's not going to doesn't mean tons more time on the end of your workout. In terms of total work volume, you could be doing more or less the same when we're starting to look at like reps and sets.
Yeah.
We're just higher intensity across the two exercises, but same amount of volume. So it's really more of an there's skill that's involved here in some cases, but we're really upping the intensity level. So I like the fact that it's time efficient. What else do we want to say before we get into like how we can kind of apply this?
I mean, I think it's a great way. And even kind of you're talking about the time efficiency. Mm-hmm. It's a great way. I don't know, for myself, like I fell in love with the gym and working out initially as more of an athlete. And then I got really into the bodybuilding scene and the machines and the isolation and that kind of style. And I kind of got rid of a lot of the athletic movement. So it's this style of training. It's a great way to add in just a little variety, make you feel like explosive athletic again. And, we haven't talked all the, initially sets, reps and everything, but it could be even just, a set of 3 after your squat, it takes another 10 seconds, if anything. But it can give you that benefit from
that boost. So, yeah, it's kind of like a cheat code to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience with this is the same as yours is as an athlete, but I gotta have to tell you, it wasn't very good. And the reason why it wasn't very good is because I'm not sure my coaches at the time, when I was going through it, truly understood the concepts and the application piece. It was more, and I certainly, it wasn't explained to me why we were doing what we were doing. And I think intention has everything to do with what you're going to get out of this. So for me, it was almost like punishment, because if you're really working hard, it's a challenge, right? So it kind of felt like why are we being beat on today? And I didn't even realize at the time what we were doing or why we were doing it. And again, I'm not quite sure the coaches that I had at the time really did either. Yeah. They were just following some plan or whatever. But yeah, that's how I was introduced to it too. And then as I got on and I recognized what was working better for me and how I needed to change my program for me to both stay interested, keep the progressions going, get recovered, and keep my head around just continuing to do new, challenging, hard things for me, I found where I could put it in. And so where it's recently showed up for me is on the turf here at the gym, and I've been working some sprint and run work, lateral work as well from an explosive perspective. So it's been fun. I've been this is really fun. I feel like an athlete, when I'm doing that. Maybe I'm not, but and where does that apply for me? In life? Well, look, I'm not going to go out there in the field and compete anymore. I don't do that, but I do play in the game of life. And I do like to feel like I can do things. And if I wanted to do something, I don't want to feel like I was restricted, whether that's go out and play maybe a little game of pick up basketball on Thanksgiving, or, run some routes out in the park with my brother throwing the football at me. I understand my limitations, but these are things that can kind of open up those things to allow people to do things that they wouldn't typically do and feel a little bit more like an athlete in terms of how they're applying their training. So let's talk about some of the more of the detail, how would you apply it? So we sort of tiptoed around how heavy do you need to go in your movement, and then what maybe a rest time might look like, and then what the next movement might look like in terms of the plyo or the power movement that you're doing. So let's break this down a little bit. So I think from an overview perspective, if we're trying to choose two movements and we know we need a big, heavy strength, force production movement to start with, I'm going to recommend that people start with something that they know and stick to the tried and true movements that are out there for building maximal force production and strength. Things that we know. Now, it's not to say that you can't apply other things, which we can talk about. But I think especially when you're starting this, and if you're really trying to understand and get the most benefit out of this PAP and the things that it can bring along with it, we stick to some very basic stuff, like a barbell squat, like we mentioned. The other ones would be like a deadlift, right? Or a Romanian deadlift, something like that, where we can really load up to get into, we're attacking the entire body of sorts, but we're also being maybe more specific to a specific movement pattern and a group of muscles. I guess if we had to really quickly go down there and be a squat, some type of a hinge, like a heavier Romanian or full deadlift, a big push, a big horizontal pull, maybe a big vertical pull, and maybe an overhead press. That is not to say that you couldn't add some rotation, and you couldn't apply this in other places, some type of a unilateral movement, some type of a very, specific joint movement like elbow or knee flexion and extension. There's a lot of things you could do here. But in terms of what we're trying to apply sort of at the base level for that athlete, those are probably the ones I would stick to. You guys, is there anything I left out there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's the lateral movement, as well. You said unilateral movement patterns, but I'm thinking like lateral lower body type of exercise.
Yeah, but something that all of these require skill, but obviously with the higher intensity level that we're applying, we want to make sure we're balancing intensity against skill, right? Yeah. So, and again, when we're doing these, we're going to be doing more than one set, generally speaking, if we're trying to be organized to it. So we want to make sure we're not doing anything where as we become more fatigued, the level of skill we've chosen takes away from the potential that we could get from the loading that we're doing or the force production that we're trying to get from the particular exercise. And an example would be, obviously, if I'm trying to do some single leg, loaded pistol squat to max effort, and set one, and that being followed by like a single leg hop, broad jump or something like that. That's very advanced. Yeah. And set number one, in whatever you choose, may look and feel, it shouldn't, but it may look and feel a little different on set 3. And so we just want to make sure we're managing that. So I would stick to the base. My basic recommendation, I would stick to the basics.
Well, and I think kind of important with that I think the main training effect you need from the primary movement needs to be intensity, and intensity defined as like load or output, right? So if it's a single leg pistol squat, and it's unstable and you can't really have a good, and there's skill, you're not going to have a high intensity. So you may not get to that high motor recruitment that we talked about earlier. So it needs to be something that you can overload aggressively and effectively. So
yeah, I picked that one as an example because I think everybody could kind of get what you just said there, and how you explained it. That like, okay, even if you loaded it, you're still not potentially overloading the entire system, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're really trying to tax the system here, as a whole. So when we do that, we're choosing an exercise that we can do exactly what you just said, but something where we're going to be probably applying somewhere between the maybe 1 to 5 repetitions. You choose. Intensity is important. If you're choosing something that's like right around your 1 to 3 or even 5 rep max, you're fine, right?
Yeah.
So maybe more than 1 rep, right?
Yes.
2 to 5, somewhere in there. Generally speaking, that's a high level of intensity, and so that's kind of where you want to keep your load. Keep your loads based on the movement that you choose. The next part is like, obviously we need to know what the next exercise is. And CC, to your point, what you referred to is something that's similar to, maybe even mimics the big strength movement that you just did. So like when we started, we talked about like the squat to broad jump or squat to box jump, something like that. It could be though something else. You could add a sprint. You could add something like that too after the squat. Depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, I think you can apply it where you're getting very specific and like, hey, this is the exact movement pattern, the same muscles, the same like recruitment or things are firing, or just the same general output from like the lower extremity, like the example, like a squat into a sprint. Like maybe there's some different things going on, but it's still just that high output.
Yeah, what's important is whatever, again, movement you choose, you have the skill to perform it, and you can do it at the highest possible output level, right? Based on, obviously, and do it based on being pre-fatigued from that big strength movement. So that's how you're kind of choosing movements. Now, we can go through a list of like kind of what our favorite combos are. We'll do that in a second. But what's really important is what we left out in the middle there, which is the rest time in between movement 1 to movement 2. We talked about intensity, and what we didn't talk about was like how much of the, how many reps or how long do we spend in this second movement. The recommendation I would give is somewhere around the same. So if you're doing like the broad jump, it's somewhere between maybe 3 to 5 repetitions, but the important part here is like how long do we wait before we do that? And I think there's some nuance here, so we should get into it. What say you?
We were talking about this earlier. I think there's nuance. There's a lot of it depends. It's that, you're managing fatigue, like somebody's cardiorespiratory fitness, their ability, how skillful is the next movement. It's a very simple movement. You can maybe have a little bit of shorter rest time. Maybe it could be a 1 to 5, a 3 to 5 kind of second rest from the main movement to the next, where it could be upwards to maybe at the most end, like 30 seconds, and I would mainly use a little bit longer rest time if there's more skill in that secondary movement. And there's more like, they got to be aware, they got to be thinking, they're not just putting force output, but they're actually having to, I don't know, you're going to have them do a jerk or something for the secondary. Like there's some movement going on there. Maybe that's closer to the 30-second rest. So there's kind of some things to...
Yeah, no, I think you landed it as far as, the cardiorespiratory, then the muscular fatigue as well. So having to manage all of that, and then depending on what that second exercise is and the skill level that's involved, there's probably more skill level in an overhead split jerk than there is with a body weight, jump squat.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it depends, I think.
Yeah. So there are, and that's an answer that comes up a lot, on the show and just in what we do, and it should. I mean, that's an appropriate response. But again, it's also very general, and that can frustrate people. They want to know, like, exactly what should I do? Well, we can't tell you exactly what to do, but we can get pretty close in terms of some general recommendations. So I think those are really good points, that you're making there. So in terms of kind of rolling down this list of, okay, so I said squat, hinge, push, pull in 2 ways, and overhead press. What are some of the things that people could combo to maybe start to implement this into their training, experiment a little bit, or maybe even put a longer term program together? So we start with the squat. We kind of talked about a couple. There's a box jump, there's a broad jump. Anything else you guys like?
The jump squats. I like jump squats. I like box jumps. I like box jumps from the plyo perspective. So you're jumping down off the box to then jump up off the ground for a squat. For a hinge, you'd mentioned RDLs. I really like RDLs followed by a broad jump, having to load the hips and then moving yourself forward. I was going to say vertically, but horizontally.
Horizontally, vertically. I think kind of tied into even like a broad jump. I mean, you can either think, especially with lower bodies, it's easy to think plyos. You can think of moving your body or an implement in the same movement pattern. So I love like if someone is just implementing this like a log toss or like an over the shoulder toss, something like that, where they're getting good hip flexion extension into that. Or a kettlebell swing, like if I'm building on their kettlebell swing, maybe in like a dead stop, something where there's high output. But
yeah, you kind of stole my thunder there with the dead stop piece, because what's really important, I think, for power output and maximizing this elastic potential that we have as humans is to do things from a standstill or from a stopped position. And we're trying to generate as much power from that and kinetic energy from that very that still position. Those are going to be your most powerful athletes, the ones that can do that the best. And that starts with learning how to decelerate, which you just mentioned, like you're on a box, you jump down off the box into absorb it, and then are able to generate force from that absorption, like loading the spring and then explosively moving out of that.
Well, and even sometimes for people, it could even be if they're really new, they don't know how to absorb force. It could just even be a depth drop where they don't even produce force. They just absorb that force into the floor, and that's enough of a quick loading.
And that herein comes the depends, right? Depending on where this person is in their journey, but also what their goal is, what they may be wrestling with from a limitations perspective or something like that. So 100% agree. It could be any of these could be modified based on the again, the who, the what, the why. Those are all very, very important things. All right, let's move forward. Let's get into that hinge movement. So, I mentioned earlier, like a big heavy deadlift or Romanian deadlift. Those are things people can wrap their head around a little bit. And it doesn't have to be with a barbell. It could be with dumbbells. It could be anything that's going to get you to that 2 to 5 rep maximum at an output level of near 90% is important. But any other ones that come up for you there?
For what?
For the hinge. For a heavy hinge.
I've even played, this is more advanced, but you could even get into, I don't know, you could get into like even cleans work. Like I've done some contrast work, and it's intentional, but where I'll do some sort of, a heavy hinge, and then do either a barbell clean or a kettlebell clean or some sort of movement like that as well. There's a little more, but again, that can kind of go more back to there's some skill, there's some thought, so that might be that longer rest.
Yeah, it depends on the athlete that you're working with, and again, what the outcome we're looking for is. But I like that one. Yeah. Moving over to like secondary exercise, more power, output exercise. With the hinge, you mentioned like the kettlebell swing. I like that one if you're trying to build somebody's kettlebell swing, right? It could be that. It could be something as simple as that, to really try to drive strength and power through that hinge motion. That's one. What do you like?
I like the broad jump. I like the concentric phase of the kettlebell swing, but using a medicine ball. To a wall.
So log toss.
Like a log toss,
like a log toss. Yeah, this is interesting. I'm really glad we're going here because you mentioned the ball. What we haven't mentioned here is bands yet. The power profile through those bands can be very helpful, in terms of loading.
Like the variable resistance.
Through those things. So you got balls, bands, bells, those types of things can really help in kind of those hinge movements. They come in other places too, but like that log toss is an awesome one. If you're coming out of the hinge movement where you're, again, that ball's, but for those people that don't know what that is, when we say log toss, that ball's down between your legs. You're starting from a dead standstill, and you're basically, think of like a kettlebell swing, only you're going to let the kettlebell go. In this case, it would be the ball, and more of like a Dynamax type ball or a sand-filled like slam ball or something like that to the wall, and then repeat that movement 2 to 5 times. Yeah, I like that one too.
Because I think it kind of goes into, I think when there's like the implements moving and they have to. Even in a dead stop swing, there's still a component of absorbing force, producing force, in that, where the log toss, all you have to focus on, and it's kind of that dead stop principle we were talking about earlier of you're just accelerating.
That's
you're
it.
Just working on the concentric and that's it.
Yep. So you're taking out the deceleration piece outside of you're having to slow your body that's going into extension. Yeah. But again, we start with a big, heavy extension movement, and we just need to stay somewhere in that. We're trying to stay somewhere in that realm. Going back to like the broad jump, still a lot of knee and hip extension and back extension in that movement. When we're even going into shoulder flexion, and there's a lot happening there, right, in that type of movement. So I like that. If we moved over into the next one, and I think those are the two, like, I think exercise or movement patterns that you see probably most happening. They're pretty sexy, right? And somebody's probably done those type of movement patterns before, and it kind of makes sense to them. We start getting into the upper body, upper extremity. I think things, people are like, they struggle maybe to kind of know what to do. These are my favorite because you get to use your legs as a base, right? Versus they're not quite as taxing. So you can, because you just don't have as much muscle, working for you. Like you don't have your lower extremity working for you generally in the same way. Yeah. So here's an example. So like you're looking at me like I'm fucking nuts.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to keep up with the conversation because some of the things you're saying. So are you talking now? We're moving to the upper extremity.
Yeah. Okay. So what's harder to do? A barbell back squat or a bench press?
Like from a neurological, taxing squat.
Yeah, absolutely. Way harder. Yeah. So as we start to move up, things change a little bit, and the movements can. I think the movement. Well, we'll get into those. So the push. So let's say I'm using a bench press, right, as my big heavy, horizontal push movement. Could be other things, but I like that one. Most people can relate to that, and we can overload the fuck out of that, right? Yeah. The one that I like the most moving out of there this depends, but I think people get a kick out of this one. And it also opens up and shows a lot of different things, is that med ball chest pass.
Oh, yeah.
Against the wall or just out, like even
into the floor,
onto the floor, chasing it, doing it again. So you pick that thing up and you're just going out to that heavy chest ball med pass. Doesn't even have to be that heavy. Yeah. Just something that provides a little bit of resistance. And again, my body is able to really get behind that and just produce as much force as possible. I don't know. I like that one.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, my favorite is going from a bench press into a plyo push-up.
Yeah.
And whether it's a plyo push-up where your hands are just coming up off the floor and then you're having to reabsorb the force, or as you advance, a plyo push-up where you actually have to clap.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because that's more advanced and it takes a lot more power output to be able to get the clap before your hands land on the ground.
Well, and that is something that there is some progression as well of like you can go to an incline and do the plyo push-up as well. But
so I think it's a great one for somebody that's just being introduced to this. Again, here's another place to implement bands where you go into like a banded press or something like that, like where you can really increase speed and power output without having to overload or tax the body in a way that's unnecessary in order to, again, leverage the PAP, right? Yeah. So good ones there. If you don't have balls or bands like in this one, then plyo push-ups are great. And to your point, like that elevated one, like maybe we're doing it like in a squat rack, off the J cups in a bar, or on a bench, or on a countertop, or whatever.
Well, and even like the intent, when we say plyo too, really what that means is like the intent of moving as quickly as possible. So let's say you're holding the bar on an incline bench press, it can just be really having the intent of getting up as quick as you can with a lighter load. It doesn't necessarily always have to be, leaving the ground, leaving the floor, leaving the bar.
Yeah, you're 100% right.
It's the intent. That's the important part of it.
Super, super important point. All right, so let's move into horizontal pull. Horizontal pull is a big, heavy row, and if we're really trying to tax like the major movers for a rowing position, I'm not going to choose like a bent over barbell row, which is also obviously getting into my lower extremity, low back, hip complex, things like that. I might. There may be a cost. I'm not saying never. Yeah. I'm just saying I'm probably not going there. I'm going to like a big, heavy, plate loaded machine row, or maybe, if we can stack up enough on the cable row or something like that, where I am really focused on depression, retraction, and a good solid movement pattern for my horizontal pulling. That's what I pick. Anything that comes to mind for you guys?
As far as like the heavy loaded movement?
Heavy loaded horizontal.
I think like you can get into some heavy dumbbell. There's we haven't talked about this of like unilateral versus bilateral, but so there could be a point there. But even I love putting someone on an incline bench and getting them some heavy dumbbells. I feel like and they're laying on their stomach on the bench. I feel like it's a great way to isolate. They're still free moving with the dumbbells, but you can load it up and they kind of get some feedback for the position of their spine a little bit more too. So I love like an incline heavy row.
Yeah, I love that too. Because you take out the whole, like, I have to stabilize a ton here through my trunk and into my lower extremity.
Yeah.
That's a great one. And very low risk.
Yeah.
And that one particularly, especially so if you're trying to apply this to somebody that may have some type of a pre-existing issue.
Yeah. Like
again,
a cranky low back or anything like that. It's taking the load for them. They're not holding a hinge position while they're doing the row in a bent over row.
And when they're done, they can just drop the weight and walk away. And get up and move into the next movement pattern. I really like that one too. All right, moving into movement pattern number 2. What do you like for horizontal pulling as it relates to your plyometric speed component?
This isn't. It's not necessarily. It's as purely just horizontal, but especially if we're rowing in a way that's more lat focused, I like a heavy ball slam. Because you're still getting a lot of, shoulder flexion extension in the slam. So that's something that I would probably go to the most, whether it's with a med ball or a dead ball, like a sand ball or something like that.
I like the banded speed pulls. Yeah.
Yeah, I like those.
Yeah,
strength band.
I love the speed pulls when we start getting into the rowing stuff. Or with the bands. Sorry, I think it's just it's an easy thing to do. You don't need a ton of setup. It's very controlled. Depending on where you maybe are for the day, you don't really have to choose a weight, so to speak, or even a distance to move. You kind of know where you are with the bands. It's very easily adjusted.
Yeah.
I just put a little bit more tension in this orange band today or green band today, or a little less, depending on kind of where I am. And as a coach, I like that because it helps me make easy adjustments as I'm watching my athlete or my client do it, going, okay, that looks like it's a little bit, they're struggling with this, like with the skill piece of this. So how can I help? Is this just, they need a cue, or maybe we just need to take the stretch out of that band, right? And that resistance profile, we can change that very, very quickly. So I like that as well.
Yeah.
And so that leads into the vertical pull. And, I think there's some real basic ones there. You've got pull down machines. You've got you've got obviously like a weighted pull up or a pull up, depending on the person. But I would say if you're applying this exercise to a pull up, you're likely doing a weighted or resisted, let's just say, pull up.
Yeah.
Because if you can only do 5 pull ups, if that's your max, you probably shouldn't be doing contrast training with a vertical pull. Not yet.
That's kind of for that conversation later of who is this appropriate for. So like if you can't get to 5 bodyweight pull-ups, probably not appropriate.
Yeah. So I'm putting that out there. Like I think that's an important one. And you mentioned one of my favorite ones for this with regard to the contrast piece, and that is like a med ball slam, an overhead med ball slam, reverse med ball slam.
Yeah.
So I really like that movement where you're taking that thing all the way overhead, slamming it behind you. There's a certain level of skill there, but it can happen very, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Anything
else you like? I mean, we mentioned bands. Are you going? So you could go back to the bands.
You can go back to bands if you're ready to. If you're able to do pull-ups, I really like jumping pull-ups. I mean, that's one of my favorite types of exercises, assuming that it's executed properly.
Well, and this goes back depending where you're at as well. I've actually played with, and I see you do this all the time actually, is doing weighted pull-ups heavy, dropping the weight belt and doing body weight pull-ups.
Nailed it. Or banded
pull-ups. Yeah.
Banded assisted
some
pull-ups.
sort of where it really gets you on the other opposite end of the spectrum. And again, that intent of I'm moving my body up quickly as much as I can, but...
Yes. So banded pull-ups where the ones I like to do here are actually, because I think this is a very quick transition, and it's the easiest to do when you start looking at the skill perspective, and that is to have the band stretched across the J-cups at the bottom and it's at your feet.
A little easier to get in.
Yeah, rather than having that band wrapped around the bar and then trying to put a knee or a foot through that. And because that changes the pendulum action, it's going versus the straight up and down. And I have seen this applied incorrect, I would just say, in a not awesome way several times. And that is like people are getting out of control on that bandit,
sloppy.
And it gets really sloppy.
Up,
So remember, the important thing here is this is a skill, and we need to be and want to be working through that skill when we're doing it. So when you move to like this, anytime we're adding speed, like in a plyometric or things like that, things can't fall apart. So this one takes some practice, more practice than maybe even some of the other ones, in my opinion, to really nail this one, to get this one right. Like, what is the right band strength for me? Where does it need to be adjusted? And how do I control my body through space while I'm doing it? But to your point, like if you just had a pull-up bar,
yeah,
you didn't have anything else, to really use or whatever, or, like a squat rack with a pull-up bar where you can stretch that band, or even, again, if you had to go around, loop it around the bar and then around your feet or foot.
Yeah.
It's very simple, very accessible to most people. So I like that one as well. All right, I think the one we haven't mentioned yet is without getting, again, deep into the weeds with like rotational stuff and maybe specific joint, like elbow and knee flexion extension type movements, which I don't want to dig into today. Again, I don't think that's super appropriate for this conversation, but is the overhead press. So, I mean, overhead press is a real simple one.
Yeah. Could
be an overhead barbell press. Could be a dumbbell press. I mean, those are something you can really load up safely.
Yeah. I've been loving a lot, like a Viking press. I've been loving that a lot.
Oh, that's an awesome suggestion.
Yeah. So
yes, explain what the Viking press is for those people that don't understand.
I may butcher what this is called, but it's basically you get a landmine and you can set it up a couple different ways. There's a way to do it in the rack where it's more of you're loaded horizontally, but I like doing it even from a landmine still, where you put this horizontal bar. I'm guessing it resembles a Viking ship or something.
Right.
And you put the horizontal bar and it has some neutral grip or pronate.
It attaches to the end of the bar, to the sleeve of the barbell. Yeah.
And you can do, and then this is another conversation, but you can change it whether you're standing or kneeling as far as how much load or how much actually overhead you are. But I love it's a great way to get people start moving overhead, and the implement kind of forces them into a better position in their overhead position, because a lot of people can't actually get overhead well.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you're right. So this is a great case for using that for the person that may struggle with control in this movement pattern, and more specifically that has overhead mobility or flexibility issues.
Yes.
More specifically, we'll call it mobility. And so many people do.
Yeah.
And I hear all the time, I hear coaches go down this long list of all the reasons why you should not take somebody overhead, or if they can't do this, then you can't do that, and all this stuff. It drives me nuts. But the Viking press is a great way because you can adjust that for just about most of anybody's needs, specific to what their range of motion looks or doesn't look like,
exactly
what their mobility is. And, as we get older, and I work with and talk to a lot of guys that are ex-athletes, maybe from the military as well, or from law enforcement, where they're in kit a good part of their life or their day. They've been loaded down, and everything is happening in this front workspace all the time. Plus, they've been injured. Plus, they go hard in the gym. All of these things. Plus, we're just aging, and things. We tend to lose that as we go. All of that stuff where they just lack overhead mobility, and going there or trying to force that is not necessarily a good idea. So without getting off on a tangent, really glad you brought up the Viking press, because that's a way to not have to go directly vertical and still get the benefits of a we'll just say, I don't like the adjective, but the very heavy overhead press that may not be directly overhead, but is still is giving you the ability to perform that at that high level without necessarily,
and it's controlled.
It's controlled. It's not exacerbating anything that's already there, and without having any disillusions about or false illusions about, like, I'm going to make all my overhead issues better. Probably not, man.
Yeah.
Probably not. We can get it as good as we can get it, but how much time do you really have to train and get there? And versus how important is this to you, in the long term, with all the other things you have to do, in life and with your workout. So that's my case for the Viking press.
Yes, exactly.
So we get through the Viking press. Favorites with the contrast?
Medicine ball tosses to the wall.
Back to the ball. Yeah. So like an overhead, like almost like a wall ball type toss.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do that.
Yep. Anything else?
I mean, I love some sort of push press if they can handle it. So if they can do some sort of push press, whether it's the dumbbell or I've done it with kettlebells, barbells, whatever. I also love, if you got two landmines, for thinking that. I love, for more advanced, I love getting into like a split jerk with a landmine. Kind of same thing. It allows that kind of more integrative, like full body component, but same thing if the overhead, it's not as much skill as a full overhead, like split jerk or something like that. So I like that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, particularly in the landmine, because you're starting from that dead standstill. basically in the perfect position. You're preloaded and
Yeah.
you're just driving through that thing. I love that. Yeah, I like those. I mean, another case for bands, in band work here, I think it's another great one. Maybe some light dumbbell work, could also work. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to do like handstand push-ups and shit like that. That's not necessary. I don't recommend those, quite frankly, for 99.9 million% of the population. So that kind of hits all the things. I mean, those are things people can try and try out. Like one of the cool things that we've tried to do, while this is advanced, like we do try to implement this into our programs. Obviously, if you're working with Ryan and you're out on the floor, he's going to put that where it should be in your program in the way that makes the most sense for you. But if you're kind of doing it yourself and trying to figure this out, we put this stuff into our Red Dot Fitness Max program, and it's organized. It's really well organized. And we explain to you what you're doing and why you're doing it and try to walk people through it. We'll get back to RDF Max in a minute, but RDF Max is more of our advanced program for that person that is, I would say, well into the intermediate, closer to the advanced level. And I say that not to say that it's not inclusive of anybody that wanted to try it, but you're probably not going to reap the rewards of what that program has to offer you if you haven't done the base work, the fundamental work first, which you would find in like a Red Dot Fitness Strong program, which is really kind of, I don't want to say it's a prerequisite, but it does put you in the right position to transition right in.
Yeah.
Weird how that worked. But the point of this is like, who is this appropriate for? We kind of talked about that a little bit, and where kind of might it go into your training?
The contrast training.
Yeah. How do you do this? Like, what are the things that we need to leave people with in terms of that piece of it? Like if they're thinking about it or where they might try it. And I'll lead off with, you mentioned like, this isn't something you have to necessarily think about doing, like, and completely change your program about, and even your whole workout for the day. You could do one set of this on your chest day.
Yeah.
Whatever, you could implement it there. But how else would you guys suggest, kind of getting somebody prepared, like a preparatory phase, either maybe mentally and or physically, physiologically, to really be able to reap the rewards of this? What are some, maybe, I dare say, prerequisites to this?
I mean, I think this is a longer conversation about, I think when this is applied inappropriately and maybe too soon, is can you do this motor pattern without a high velocity, can you squat? Can you bodyweight squat? Can you goblet squat? Can you barbell squat? Like if you're still trying to master all those movements,
those basic
movement patterns, and then let alone getting to some load, getting to some muscle mass, getting to all those things, then you need to stick with those until you can master those. That you don't need to worry about this if you still have those, a lot going on with those, let's say.
Yeah, so. A lot going on. Yeah, like we're not trying to do black belt shit when we're still a white belt.
Yes,
that's part of it.
I would agree with that 100%. I'm just thinking about back in the day when I was working with individuals or athletes or individuals from more of a rehab perspective. They had a really strong base, going back to your point, as far as working on the basic movement patterns before then we would put in some contrast training, because the contrast training component was at the end of their rehab, getting them ready back for sport performance.
Yeah, return to play. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ryan, you kind of brought up a point earlier just about like how you had been introduced to it, and then kind of your experience, with it. And so had I. Like didn't seem very organized. Like it was just kind of like thrown in there. It was something that we did for a week and didn't really understand it. And while you can get some benefit from this training, probably in a time period like that, if you just went through one full week of all your, squat, hinge, push, pull, vertical press movements, are you really going to get anything out of this long term? And what have you really learned? And more specifically, like, what is your body learning? Because the whole idea is give it the minimum effective dose, get the maximum result you're looking for, right? So how do you kind of put this together? I think like if you're going to do this and you just want to play and experiment, totally do that.
Yeah.
Like just play and experiment and put it in a little bit at a time. What should you expect? Not massive increases if you're going to do it that way. You should also expect to be a little bit sore, right? Like, because we are taxing the system, the neuromuscular system, more specifically the tissue, at a much higher level we're asking it to do more, and we're talking about doing it through explosive or plyometric type movements, as well as this high level of force production. That can create issues for people. So there needs to be some type of preparatory phase going into this. So if you've been kind of going through your, you do your basic bodybuilding workout, and you've been working sort of in your hypertrophy phase, and your repetition ranges are up there around 10, 12, maybe as many as 15, maybe as low as 8, and you're not really working at that 90%, right? You're working maybe a more slow, controlled, 3-2-3 type of tempo or something like that. That's a brutal tempo, but something slow and controlled like that. Like you need to prepare your tissue for what you're about to take it through. And I would enter into it through the strength training phase of whatever your program is, where you are pushing the heavier loads for more force production versus time under tension.
Yeah.
If you're following me out there, bodybuilders or strength guys, that's one thing to consider in terms of ramping your body up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of building on that. Like when we get to really get an effective response from a low rep range, you have to have a high neurological output and response, right? And so I think, to your point, getting used to being able to have a high output, it's a very different style of training than, okay, can I kind of suffer through this set of 12, 15? It's not as much output on each rep. You need to learn how to actually have high output before then you add in another high output. Because not even just being sore, if you implement this too quickly, it's very neurologically taxing. You'll feel just like fatigued, like you just got ran over by a truck, right. You'll just feel, fatigued, drained.
So there's recovery debt that accumulates here on this, and you need to be recovered in order to maximize this. It makes zero sense to go into a workout like this in debt.
Yeah.
That's counterproductive.
Yeah.
So I love that point. I think that's an important one. I guess some of the other stuff that comes up for me in this is, you guys mentioned don't do black belt shit before, you're done being a white belt, how to kind of transition this direction, and understanding being a really good or an expert at the basic movement pattern, but preparing tissues and preparing neurologically. There is a mindset piece to this too. And you just touched on that, with regard to the level of fatigue, you have to know how to go to the pain cave to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. Now it's when I say pain cave, I just mean almost from an internal intensity mindset perspective. Like, this is hard work, or it should be hard work. If it doesn't feel hard, if your heart rate if your heart rate didn't get up, if you're not breathing heavy at the end of this, if your hands don't go on hips and you're having to walk a lap to walk it off, then you're probably not applying this correctly. Now, we mentioned, depending on the application that we're giving it to, specific to the client and their fitness level, and particular circumstance, that's going to look different on different people. But this does feel, and it may not look difficult if you're watching the athlete do it. It was very few repetitions, but neurologically there's a lot of demand there. And so you have to be ready to kind of take yourself into that mindset. That's going back to Red Dot Fitness Max. Mm-hmm. We try to kind of lead people through this process and prep them with the capacity building phases, so that by the time they get there, they have at least tuned up their energy systems and their recovery systems. And, this doesn't take into account any nutrition, sleep, stress mitigation, all that kind of stuff. But we've tried to tune them up in a good way to be ready for this type of exercise. Yeah. But I can't change your mental or intestinal fortitude. So this is something that, you need to be prepared for there. Also, this is something that you should be prepared to kind of step back and evaluate and track. Like, what is actually happening? Am I just stepping into the pain cave and doing sexy shit on the floor and impressing my friends and posting cool videos on Instagram? Or am I actually getting something out of this? Because don't equate quote unquote hard work with an actual result, a positive result, or the result that you're looking for. And don't make any predeterminations about what you're getting. And also, don't marry yourself to any one thing. Let's go back to the push thing, like where we did the bench press to med ball press, chest pass. maybe that's not working for you the same way, or you're not getting the same training effect from that you would get from the plyo push-up with the clap, right? And so unless you've walked yourself through this process a little bit, it's don't marry yourself to any combination of exercises. We talked about this before. Your body doesn't know whether it's a barbell bench press or a push-up. It just understands that you are being challenged or not challenged in a certain way, and it will respond appropriately to that. So choose things. Don't marry yourself to things. Experiment, play, track, see where your body is and your performance is actually taking you. Look, if you're just doing this to have fun, and fuck it, do it to have fun. Have a great time. But if you're really looking for a performance benefit, tracking is, I believe, paramount when you start getting into these advanced type of applications like this is. So, that was a lot, in terms of what we have, what's going on there with the contrast training. Anything we left out? We talked about pitfalls. We talked about risk benefits.
Maybe talk about how often you would do this or implement this type of training.
Yeah.
Because we were just talking about recovery debt.
Let's talk about it. So
this isn't necessarily something that you would do every day of the week for, your upper body.
Right.
Yeah. Again, this is where there's always nuance, and it depends of like where the, feeling out as a coach, where's my client, how's their recovery, even for myself, where's my client, how's my recovery, but where like 2 to 3 times a week max, if you're really going to get that max intent. And you can go back to like body part, right? So you can hit upper twice a week and then do 2 lower twice a week for some contrast training. So
you mean exercises?
And even exercises, it might, most I ever do is maybe 2 exercises of this intent in a workout. You shouldn't be, every single exercise you do in your program, you're trying to contrast now just because you've heard this is cool and I'm going to start doing this now.
Great point.
And I see that still where, how can I contrast this exercise? How can I contrast this exercise? If you're not getting a good effect and there's not a high output, and later in the workout, you're not going to get a good progression or good effect.
Yeah, we talked about this. There's a large cost to this. There's a high demand, which is a high cost, and that cost could mean taking away from other workouts, other areas that you're really trying to focus on, and it could impact you in daily life as well in terms of what's going on from a recovery perspective, cognitive ability, like just being uncomfortable, feeling tired, actually physically being tired, all that kind of stuff. So that's there for me. Right now, I've picked it back up in the last 2 weeks. I've only planned to do it 1 time a week.
Yeah,
and it's on a weekend. So I'll do it on the weekend where I'm not impacted by anything else, and it's just that. And so very specifically, that workout is going to be it's mostly lower extremity. I'm not doing anything else. So it's either a hinge or a squat type movement, and I'm only picking one, and I'm doing that, and then followed by my plyometric movement, and that's the workout.
Yeah, around
some mobility work that I'm doing for my shoulders and my upper extremity. Also some run mechanics that I'm working on right now because I'm trying to get, sort of my feet back under me a little bit, and a little bit of lateral work. Some kind of, let's call it speed, agility, quickness work. So my footwork's a little bit better out there on the range and some of the things I'm trying to do out there. So, and get better at there in life. It's been a little while. It feels fucking awkward. It feels awkward. And I have to tell you, just last weekend on the Sunday, I did this, I'm sore in kind of interesting places. My ankles, right? My peroneals down low, below my knees. Everything else feels pretty good, but down low, I'm
those little stabilizers, those little things that don't get used on the other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh damn. I'm hurting. So that, it feels great.
Yeah.
It feels great, but I'm still sore. It's Wednesday when we're recording this. I did that on Sunday. I'm hoping by the end of today, it starts to dissipate a little bit because I'm usually a 36 to 48 hour DOMS person now.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be like that, but it is whatever, my advanced age, that's what's happening. So I'm dealing with it, but those are things. So that's how I'm programming it into my workouts right now. And then we're actually working on some different programming that I want to test. And so this is actually prepping me to be ready to have the capacity to truly test that program when I get there. That's where my mindset is. So look, if you are looking to maybe get into, before we close out here, is there anything we need to do to as Steven, our good friend Steven, say, tie a bow on this and put it to bed?
I think it's just, this can be a way to change your training, but make sure it's appropriate for you, and you'll know if it's appropriate for you. Like listen to feedback from your body. Listen to, hey, are you trying to do that 3 times a week and you're still sore from the last time? Like try to feel out to those markers, but it can be a great way to change up your training and make it exciting again.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just kind of adding some little spice to the to the mix. If you're looking to find a little bit longer term, more organized program that's periodized over as much as 4 months, you guys, you might check out Red Dot Fitness Max by going to rdfmax.com. When you get there, it talks a little bit about the program. It's 4 months. You get all the workouts. You get video demonstrations. You're also going to get a guide and workbook that allows you to kind of, if you want to know, what's going on, like what's happening with the physiology, why we've organized the plan. We put a lot of time and effort into building that out so that people could read and absorb it and empower themselves to be able to apply this stuff in a way that's meaningful. There's extra bonus video tutorial information in there because videos that are linked in there, because we understand some of that reading at this point, like getting down the line, you've just heard us talk about this for an hour. It gets kind of heavy, and we're trying not to bore people with it. So we try to. We've done some videos on some ways to apply these different concepts, or let's just say more advanced concepts that include demonstrations and how you might look at it within there. It's super easy. You can access it from your phone or from your laptop. You can print everything out if you're one of those people. Track it there. If you still like pencil and paper, I'm that dude. I still like pencil and paper a lot, but it's super accessible, and you can get 20% off. So go to rdfmax.com, use code MAX20 for 20% off that program.